Dak Prescott looks to rebound in 2025 with all-star wide receiver duo CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. While the Cowboys' backfield potential is still looking bleak, we dig into the top three storylines for the Dallas Cowboys entering 2025 on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with the NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy, and betting for sportingnews.com.
We are going through all 32 NFL teams and their top three storylines entering the 2025 season. And today we're going to dig into the Dallas Cowboys. And they got a lot more interesting recently when they traded for George Pickens. So we have to figure out what this CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens duo is going to look like. Do they both have potential to finish as top 12 guy? Or is Pickens going to still just be that, wide receiver 3 type of fantasy player with CeeDee Lamb, that top dog in the NFL? And then Dak Prescott, now that he has both George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb and a new coach, can he rebound from a bad 2024 season? And then finally, that Cowboys backfield is still looking so less than average for sure. Maybe one of the worst groups in the league. Can Jaden Blue, their rookie, step up? Or is it going to be, Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders that potentially can save their career in Dallas? Everything we have to get through today. Let's start with the CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens content here. CeeDee Lamb is sitting at the wide receiver 3 ranking in 2025 fantasy drafts, while George Pickens is at wide receiver 35 rank. Vinny, when you look at these two, do you think that Lamb's cost is a bit too high and Pickens is a bit too low?
Yeah, I think you have to come to that conclusion. I mean, how much higher can you go if you're CeeDee Lamb that you're not going to get that necessarily that return on investment? He dominated targets. He was all over the field last year. Finished as the wide receiver 8 in total scoring, but only wide receiver 10 on average. Significant drop off from his wide receiver 2 scoring in 2023. Now, you would assume with Pickens in the mix, it's just not going to be a domination of targets for Lamb the way we're used to. And we look at this offense, they want to throw the ball downfield, a little bit more calculated. With Brian Schottenheimer, he's kind of that old school where you want to power run the ball and throw deep and take those deep shots. So unfortunately, they don't have a lot of power running, and their defense is a little bit suspect here as we go. They've taken some more hits, kept a few guys, but still not a strength necessarily 2 years removed from Dan Quinn. So you think Dak is going to put the ball up a little bit more. Also, the potential of getting more big plays in the offense downfield with Pickens is going to prompt this offense to be a little bit more aggressive passing the ball. Now, when you look at this, I think when you look at the better value, though, CeeDee Lamb is probably not going to be wide receiver 3 on the board. So you're already slipping. But is George Pickens going to be wide receiver 35? I don't think so. I think there's going to be an upside to him that he can really put up some numbers in this offense. Again, the nature of it is to throw downfield. Dak Prescott has a strong arm. There's not really a lot of receiving competition on this team. Beyond that at wideout, you do have Jake Ferguson at tight end, but basically Pickens has been included now in the quote top 3 targets on this team, right? So that's a good place to be on a team that figures to throw quite a bit. So I do like Dak and Pickens. That can be a really nice combination as we go forward because Dak can push it downfield. We've seen it in the past, right? To Michael Gallup and some of these other guys. When they've had that deep element, Dak Prescott is a better quarterback. It simply is because it allows him not only to use his arm and push it downfield, but also opens up the underneath routes for Lamb and Ferguson and makes it a lot easier to complete those passes for him. And maybe he'll do even a little running, right? As people are scared about Pickens, maybe you have to put some safety help over the top. Then you say, okay, there might be some room to run again for Dak. So when we look at Dak, I think he can facilitate Pickens to have a nice year. Now, this is a mild jump. I mean, he was the wide receiver 42, 43. However you look at his numbers last year, total or average, you're bumping him up to 35, even though he's in a better situation with a better quarterback and going to get a quicker path to targets here in a pass-heavier offense. So everything points to Pickens being the better value. I think Lamb can only disappoint ranked so high, but Pickens can only surprise and be pleasant and also deliver what he hasn't in Pittsburgh so far in fantasy.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Like if I'm taking a shot on one of these guys, like CeeDee Lamb is not going to kill your team. If you take him at
No,
wide
he'll be
receiver 3,
fine.
it's
Yeah.
not going to kill your team. I also don't think it's the best pick though you can make. I don't think he's going to be on many of my teams because right now it's not just that he's the wide receiver 3, but he's also, ahead of Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But then also when you're looking at the running backs going around him, I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is they're going back to back. I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs and that upside at running back every time over Lamb. Ashton Genty's going a few picks after him right now. Like I'd rather take a shot and him like just completely breaking out as a rookie and dominating fantasy leagues because Pickens with CeeDee Lamb, 2 years ago he did finish as the wide receiver 2, but now in 2 of the last 3 seasons he's finished as the wide receiver 8, right? So I do think that's more fair, realistic expectation for him, especially considering we expect those targets to decrease a little bit. Because in that year in 2023, when he was the wide receiver 2, he had 12 touchdowns that season, also 181 targets and 105 receptions. With George Pickens, you have to expect that he's still going to get 150 targets, but you cannot expect 180. I will say maybe we can expect it to be a little bit better than last year and a little bit more consistent because if Dak Prescott can stay healthy. Dak Prescott was healthy. CeeDee Lamb was averaging 15.2 points per game. Without him there, it went down to 13. So we can expect it to maybe be a little bit better, but I would put him at like wide receiver 6, wide receiver 7, and not so much, wide receiver 3. While George Pickens is just too low for him at wide receiver 35 range. We've seen him get very low target share with the Steelers, play with terrible quarterbacks, not have very many scoring opportunities. He's going to have those. And if he is the second target on this team, he should have some monster games with his big play potential. He's only had 10 career games with at least 8 targets, and he averaged is 105 receiving yards per game over those 10 games. Like, give him the targets, give him a better quarterback. I do think he can be a top 20 fantasy wide receiver next year. And at the cost at wide receiver 35, it's well worth the risk.
Yeah, you have to keep in mind that Brian Schottenheimer was in Seattle at one point, and there's a parallel to a couple of old, now former Seahawks wide receivers all the way through last year. They were with the team. Tyler Lockett going to the Titans, and DK Metcalf essentially replacing George Pickens on the Steelers. Now, that's a similar situation. You look at it where there is a potential. I mean, those guys did have 1 year where they both were very high fantasy scores at the same time. So there's that potential in the Schottenheimer offense to sustain both wide receivers. Metcalf did it through the big plays and the touchdown. So that's where Pickens is going to have to make his hay here, right? Just go up, use his size, get some long scores, get a few shots in the red zone, really cut into that potential TD total of Lamb. And then Lamb is going to do it with the volume, the trust all over the field, the efficiency, and the experience with Dak Prescott. So very similar thing that's developing for this team that did for Russell Wilson with some Schottenheimer kind of quasi-related offense there. So when you look at it, I think there's a chance that could repeat itself. So in that scenario, again, Pickens is going to cut in and rise a little bit more. That means Lamb has to be dropped on the rankings, and that would make a lot of sense.
I have a really, really hard question for you. So let's say you're sitting in the draft, in the 7th round or so, and you're looking at the wide receivers left. Maybe it's the 6th round, and you're having to decide between George Pickens or Rome Odunze. Both we expect to be wide receiver 2s on their team, right? Which one, big play guys, which guy would you go with?
I might go with Rome Odunze just because of his role that I think is going to expand here in the Bears offense and having Ben Johnson. If he steps in that Amon-Ra St. Brown role for the Bears, he's going to be cooking quite a bit. And then now you might be talking about Odunze being the steal there and maybe the next version of CeeDee Lamb or Amon-Ra St. Brown with that role. So I'd say he's a little bit safer and he's a little less volatile. We don't know if George Pickens could go off the deep end, even in Dallas with Dak Prescott. So I think that's the thing is like, if there's someone with similar upside, I'm going to go and side with them over Pickens, who is still a bit of a wild card despite the immense talent that he has. And again, we're just playing off the talent here and just saying the rankings way too low at wide receiver 35.
Yeah, I think Pickens is a safer bet to at least be fantasy relevant each week, right? Where you can plug him in. Maybe it won't be as exciting as we wanted it to be in points. With a Dunze, it's a little bit riskier where you don't, especially like week 1, you won't know if you can play a Dunze, right? We have to
Yeah.
kind of still wait to see how he works with Ben Johnson, his workload. But I think I'm with you. Dunze definitely has a much higher ceiling. I agree. All right, we're going to get into Dak Prescott now because he's kind of been thrown away this offseason in the fantasy people's minds after a really bad 2024 season and all the injuries he's been suffering lately. So is he being too much hated on? And I think he is, right? So we'll get into that right after we hear from one of our sponsors.
All right, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, exciting time in the NBA playoffs. We're near the end of both series here. The Pacers have control. The Thunder have control. So we're looking at that final coming through with Indiana and Oklahoma City. So really fun times. And we had Tyrese Halliburton, historic triple-double. So if you had done some parlaying with him and the Pacers result, you'd be sitting pretty. And really, that's what you get every night from FanDuel Sportsbook. Highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or breakout player like a Halbert, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props and the performance trends and same-game parlays. So if you did a Halliburton with the Pacers, you're very happy from last night. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. So this is a good time to get in on it if this all sounds good to you and want to get in the action. If you're new, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If that wins, you would get $200 in bonus bets to play around with. And keep in mind, again, there's not a lot of NBA left this year. You got what's left of the conference finals and then the NBA championship. So check it all out here only on FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Michelle, we do have a new weapon for Dak Prescott with George Pickens joining the crew here with CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson and the rest. Now, as you mentioned before the break, he was kind of an afterthought, just forgotten about. He was QB22 last year. He's only QB16 now, but believe it or not, he's on the way up. And look, based on his history, 2024 is not a trend-setting year. It seems like it's an anomaly. So where do you stand on Dak Prescott? Is he in position to possibly rebound into a reliable starting fantasy quarterback?
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? Last year it has such a bad taste. He gives people such a bad taste in their mouth that his rank at quarterback 16, it's going too far. Right now he's between Jordan Love and CJ Stroud, and Dak Prescott is easily the guy I would take among those three without a question. You can get him in the 9th, 10th round right now. And Prescott has been a top 4 fantasy quarterback in average points per game in 3 of the last 6 seasons. It's kind of been an up and down. So this is actually technically supposed to be his season. He's good, right? So quarterback 22 on average last season, quarterback 4 in 2023, quarterback 14 in 2022, quarterback 8 in 2021, quarterback 1 in points per game in 2020, but he only played 5 games, and then quarterback 3 in 2019. So we've seen a lot of really great fantasy seasons from him. I think he now has a great group of weapons to throw to now that they finally added a second good wide receiver for him. He still has Jake Ferguson, and the run game is still, who knows what's going to happen there. So he's going to have to throw a lot. And you brought up that you think it's an anomaly last year. Like, his completion percentage was so low compared to the rest of his career last year. So is his pass yards per attempt, and so is his pass touchdown rate. So last year, his pass touchdown rate was only 3.8%. He only threw 11 passing touchdowns in those 8 games he played. And prior to last year, from the 3 years prior, he had a 6.1 pass touchdown rate. And then in his career prior to last year, he had 5.2. So we really should expect that to positively regress, right? Like, get back to the mean. That should increase. His pass yards per attempt on average over the 3 years prior to last year was 7.5. Again, last year was 6.9. And his completion percentage was over 68%. So we should expect these things to go back to what they were throughout pretty much his entire career that we had a long, history with here. And I don't think that he should be pushed on this far down the ranks.
Yeah, I think he can end up being a very strong value for you. You look at where he's ranked between Jordan Love and CJ Stroud. Now, that's an interesting spot, right? QB16. This is where it's so-called no man's land of quarterbacks. You get past the QB1s, and then there's these guys that are similar. CJ Stroud down season last year, Jordan Love a down season. So you got to decide between these three who's going to bounce back the most. And if you trust the history and say the trends, you would say Dak Prescott has it because, again, we've only seen a limited sample size, Jordan Love and CJ Stroud in terms of starting, and their teams are in transition. You got Nico Collins, but you got other receivers you got to figure out. Jordan Love has got now Matthew Golden, and now you've got to figure out the rest of the receivers again. But Dak has some established receivers now. You know what CeeDee's going to do. You know he's going to throw to the tight end. You know what George Pickens is going to do to help him and stretch the field. So less variables around Dak Prescott. I think another thing that would be nice if Dak did a little bit of running. If he could run just a little bit, had a few touchdowns there, push towards 30 combined scores. That's what we want out of Dak Prescott and push past 4,000 yards. So that's really how you add up to Dak Prescott being a very good value here beyond QB16. So again, right now it's hard between Love, Stroud, and Prescott. Look, they all have reasons that you like because they're talented, but I think Dak with the Pickens addition this late might have catapulted him over these two guys at this stage as being the best value of the three. So I'm excited to see what he can do with finally that second true deep threat. He really hasn't had it since Michael Gallup was kind of emerging as a player. Then, of course, Gallup tore up his knee. That was that. And then they're trying to fill it with like Jalen Tolbert, Brand Cooks. None of those guys have the same upside downfield as Pickens.
Yeah, it's just like, it's not even when you're saying like, oh, I think I prefer Prescott over Love and Stroud. I think that's so easy. I honestly think it's that what confuses me is when you see Patrick Mahomes at quarterback 7, right? It doesn't matter how many bad games, fantasy games he has or bad seasons, like he keeps staying at the cost. Dak Prescott has averaged more points per game over the last 2 years than Mahomes has by a decent chunk. And he, like I said, Mahomes keeps staying high. If I'm going to have to choose Mahomes at quarterback 7 or Prescott at 16, I'm just going to go with the value of Prescott. Same thing with Kyler Murray. He's at quarterback 8. Give me Dak Prescott at quarterback 16 over him. Bo Nix at quarterback 9, Jared Goff at quarterback 10. You mentioned no man's land. I actually think that might be no man's land, right? Mm-hmm. After the top 5, 6 guys, and you get into the Mahomes and the Murray and the Bo Nix and the Jared Goffs and the Justin Fields, maybe that's a no man's land, and you might as well just wait for the Dak Prescott later, because I think he offers the same upside. We've seen his upside, and they're all risky. So you might as well just go with Dak Prescott. Again, Caleb Williams kind of ruins everything right now with his cost because it's at quarterback 13, and that's just the best cost in the draft. So we're always going to go with him. But if he wasn't so cheap, I think Dak Prescott would be my next favorite value when I'm looking here at the rankings.
Yeah, this also tends to be the fluctuation in terms of the fantasy scoring. Like we see a lot of consistency at the top with the usual suspects, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen. Now, Jane Daniels in that mix and Lamar Jackson, right? Those are the main guys that stay up there. Now Joe Burrow's kind of established himself as the top pocket passer in fantasy that you can trust. And Baker Mayfield is adjacent and kind of an extension of that right now, right? Based on where they're at. So then it's a mixed bag with the rest of them, right? When you don't know what you're going to get. If Kyler Murray's not running or willing to run as much as he should, then he's going to be just as good as these other guys, right? And you look at him more from the perspective of a pocket passer. So it's very hard from year to year to figure out how these pocket passers go, because a lot of it, they don't have that cheat code of running. And it really depends on how many touchdowns they throw and what volume will come from their defense is stinking or the running game stinking, something like that, right? That just forces someone to throw and just like compile the stats that are needed. So, yeah, this group, any of this group could finish high. I think I would pull Mahomes out of it because I think this is finally the year with his receivers that we could see Mahomes spike up to the level. Like there are receivers, there are reasons to think that he can bounce back, but like Jared Goff and these other dudes, Murray and people I'm not sure of, then I'm going to just wait for Dak. So a lot of strategy is going to be involved, but I think, again, playing the waiting game if you're in a one quarterback league is the way to go a lot. If you're not, maybe whoever the cutoff is, maybe for me, it's right at Mahomes. For me, for Michelle, it's before Mahomes. So whatever that cutoff is, that's when you wait and look at the tiers and just look for values, right? If there's not a drop off between the guys in like QB 8, 9 to QB 13, 14, whatever, then that's what you look at. Dak is right in that sweet spot.
Yeah, and especially for the fact that, Brian Schottenheimer is now the coach. You might be worried about him wanting to run the ball, but with who, right? And
Yeah.
is there a Cowboys running back worth drafting for 2025 fantasy drafts? Is it Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders, who they brought in as vets, where we have seen potential from them, right? Especially from Miles Sanders. He's had a couple good NFL seasons. Javonte Williams was supposed to be great coming out of school. Or is it Jaden Blue, who they ended up taking late in the draft, but he's a smaller back? Like who can have some value in this backfield? We will discuss to close out today's show. All right, before we get into these running backs, I want to just thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. But for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stop. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Looking at the rankings for these Cowboys running backs. So the earliest running back coming off fantasy draft boards is Javonte Williams at running back 37. And then you fall down quite a bit. And then you got the rookie Jaden Blue out of Texas going as a running back 54 on average right now in consensus rankings. And then Miles Sanders is last in this group all the way at running back 77. So undrafted, right? So is Jaden Blue for most of the point. Do you think that's the right rankings for this backfield, that Javonte Williams is the first guy being drafted in the Cowboys backfield?
I say never throw away a backfield in fantasy football. And we tend to do that. Oh, who's going to run the ball? They're going to have a split and whatnot. If it's that bad, then that first person in the committee is going to stand out a little bit more. I think they want Javonte Williams to be the promising Javonte Williams he was in Denver before the knee injury. So I think they want him to take off. But the question is, can he stay healthy? Can he handle that? As we saw last year, Rico Dowdle was a nice fantasy surprise. He was the penultimate RB2 at RB23 on the board. So that was pretty good in average scoring when available. He trades places with Miles Sanders, who comes from Carolina. Dowdle now in Carolina with Chuba Hubbard. So again, he did do something to get a deal in free agency, even though it was not staying with the Cowboys. I'm a little surprised that he went in a cheap direction to be a backup, where I thought the Cowboys could just keep him. But I would say whoever has a skill set similar to Dowdle's, who they're looking at, because Schottenheimer was there last year leading the offense. So when you look at that, I think Javonte Williams has that skill set. Now, the big question is Javonte Williams going to show that burst that's needed here? Is he going to be better and healthier a couple years removed from that knee injury that we've not seen since he went down in Denver? So that's a question, right? In theory, Javonte Williams would be great. Now, I don't think you can look at Miles Sanders too much. He had that 1 year in Philadelphia. He had all the opportunity in Carolina and didn't take it. So it really comes down to, do you want to take a shot on Jaden Blue or Javonte Williams? Again, I feel like you're going to retain some value here from this combination. So I still think they want to make Javonte Williams happen, but there are some injury concerns. We have to follow it, see what his role is, see how he fits with Schottenheimer. But again, you're not going to bang the table for any of these guys. Your best case scenario, I think it's not going to be Dowdle. I think your best case scenario is a flex that you can plug and play every week. That's your best way to look at this backfield. So I don't know if there's any value, but I don't want anything to do with Sanders. And based on the cost, I think I would take a shot on Blue over Williams here in most of my drafts.
Yeah, the thing is, like, the Cowboys' rushing offense last year was atrocious, right? But Rico Dowdle was still the running back 23 on average. So there was still some fantasy he was still a fantasy asset. And now he's gone, of course. So there's no more Rico Dowdle, and we thought it could only get better, right? We thought they'd really work on making sure this backfield is better for this year, and they did not whatsoever. It may have gotten worse. But especially once Rico Dowdle took over from Ezekiel Elliott, because the team was like, okay, this Zeke stuff is not going to work out, right? But from weeks 5 through 18, he did average 12.3 points per game. He had a lot of finishes as either as a running back in the top 10 or, running back 15, 14, 16. Like, he had a lot of RB2 finishes over that second half of the season. So I do think someone in this backfield can have some value. And I'm with you. I do think like week 1, Javonte Williams will lead this backfield, but sooner or later, I just think the efficiency is going to be so bad they're going to have to move on from him. So if I'm going to take a guy with my last pick that I'm hoping for potential, it's Jaden Blue, right? His biggest knock is that he's small at 5'9", 196, but we've seen Devin Achane. We've seen even like a Chase Brown type where they're smaller backs, but they're they get this opportunity and they succeed. 4.38 speed, great receiving back, big play machine. If he goes out there and he starts ripping off big runs and Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders are getting 3 yards per carry, Jaden Blue is going to start to earn more playing time as the year goes on. This is not a guy that you're going to be able to rely on in any of the first few weeks or maybe even handful of weeks. But if you want to stash him for a while, I do think by midseason he's going to get his shot and we'll see if he can do well. The biggest gripe too, I guess, for fantasy with Jaden Blue is you wouldn't expect him to be the goal line back, even if he were to take over this backfield just because of his size. So that also lowers his, overall ceiling. But with the receiving work, I think it can balance out.
Yeah, the talent is definitely there, and the Cowboys have an eye for some of this talent in later rounds. I mean, Dowdle was kind of an afterthought, but they took him and developed him pretty well as a back. I mean, it's far removed from Ezekiel Elliott and using a high first-round pick, 4 overall on him. And that kind of philosophy here, they're going back to the DeMarco Murray philosophy, find a good value, plug him in. The Cowboys offensive line in transition, Zach Martin retiring last couple years, they lost Tyron Smith and some of the guys that they had inside that have kind of made this offensive line so solid over the years and helped the running game. But I think they need to reboot. They've got some young guys, Tyler Guyton, Tyler Smith, to really try to get this going in the right direction. So they really want to get that running game going. And I think given the body of work of Williams and Sanders, I think Jaden Blue is that fresh look that you get. And again, a nice guy to draft a little bit later in drafts. So right now, looking at his value as an RB5, I think that's about right.
Yeah, unfortunately. I wanted something a lot more fun in this backfield, and so far we don't have it. But hey, who knows? Maybe James Cook holds out long enough for the Bills. Maybe he gets a little trade to the Cowboys. Anything could happen. But right now, it looks like we're going to be struggling to figure out who to take in this backfield leading up to 2025 drafts. But that will be it for today. We have 2 more episodes for you this week. We'll be discussing everything about the Washington Commanders on tomorrow's show and then finish up with the New York Giants on Friday. Don't miss it. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.